And more information coming out about Dylann Roth's influences in his radicalization against African Americans. The suspect in the church shootings allegedly maintained a website that included a manifesto and contained photographs of the 21-year-old posing with guns next to a Confederate flag. The FBI is investigating the site where Roth allegedly credits in part the Council of Conservative Citizens for his supremacist beliefs. The leader of that group, Earl P. Holt III, has said in response to claims of his influence that, quote, "This is not surprising. The COFCC is one of perhaps 3 websites in the world that accurately and honestly report black-on-white violent crime. The COFCC is hardly responsible for the actions of this deranged individual merely because he gleaned accurate information from our website." As accusations of the right-wing group's influences on Roth come out, Republican politicians are distancing themselves from Holt. According to an investigation by The Guardian, in recent years, Holt has donated $65,000 to Republican campaign funds, with thousands going to Republican presidential candidates, including Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Mitt Romney, and Rick Santorum. Now, Cruz, Paul, and Santorum's campaigns have since told The Guardian that they're going to refund all of Holt's donations. So as these presidential contenders try to pull away from this extremism, how powerful really is racial supremacy in the U.S.? Earlier, I was joined by Tim Wise, an anti-racist essayist and educator. We began talking about the Stars and Bars flag flying near the South Carolina Capitol State Building, but soon we cut into Governor Nikki Haley, who called for the flag to come down. Take a listen.
15 years ago, after much contentious debate, South Carolina came together in a bipartisan way to move the flag from atop the Capitol dome. Today, we are here in a moment of unity in our state, without ill will, to say it's time to move the flag from the Capitol grounds.
So I asked Tim what his thoughts were to her comments, and Tim certainly minced no words.
Well, I mean, it's the very least that she could do, but I thought the comment was historically putrid and wretched. When she says that this shooter has a twisted understanding of that flag and its history, she's being either disingenuous because she knows better, or she's utterly ignorant of the history of her own state. The people who broke away from the Union in that state that issued a declaration of causes at the time, which is easily found online. It's, I'm sure, in the state archive. I'm sure someone could send her a copy. Perhaps I will. Makes it very clear that what Dylann Roof thought that that particular flag stood for and what the Confederacy stood for is exactly what the Confederate leadership did. So in her desire to pander to the most reactionary and even overtly white supremacist forces in her state, I can only say shame on her, and it's probably a good thing for her she's not running for re-election, because frankly they would never vote for her again if she were. I mean, I think it's completely disingenuous. Yes, the flag should come down, and by the same token, she should not have had on her re-election campaign committee in the previous election a known member of the very organization that Dylann Roof was radicalized by, the Council of Conservative Citizens. But she did, and only when that was pointed out and it became a political liability for her did Nikki Haley ask for him to resign. So I think that she's being disingenuous, as are most all conservative and right-wing politicians in that state and elsewhere, when they act as if somehow it's the shooter who doesn't understand the Confederacy. Oh no, he understood it very well. It's they who continue to misrepresent it.
But wouldn't you think, or wouldn't you say that maybe she has a platform to speak from, being an Indian woman, a minority representative from her home state? Do you feel like maybe she has a platform to say these things, that maybe she understands it differently than you and I might?
Well, history is history. The fact that she's Indian American doesn't change the history, and it doesn't entitle her to twist and distort that history. If she really believed or cared about this subject, she could have talked about it before. But just last October, she actually said that this wasn't really an issue for the CEO of a state or corporate CEOs to weigh in on, that it wasn't that important. That was how many months ago? We're talking within the year. And all of a sudden, because of a tragedy, she's coming out and saying, oh, we need to do. I would say this is more about about politics and protecting conservative Republicans in her state and elsewhere from the legitimate connection to these organizations that they have than it is about principle. And her whole history in office makes that very clear.
Now, Tim, I want to move over to the government here. Let's talk about the reluctance of the part of the officials to call Dylann Roff's crime an act of terrorism. You wrote that, quote, some apparently don't wish to believe Roff was motivated by racism and white supremacy, even as he said so from his own mouth. So why are some so reluctant to describe it as terrorism?
Well, first, they don't want to describe it as racism because these folks have really banked, I'm talking about the right wing of American politics, have banked their entire existence on the idea that racism is over and we should move on, nothing to see here. The reason they don't want to call it terrorism is because they've also been politically banking on the ability to limit that term of reference only to folks who are Muslim, only to folks who are quote unquote foreign, not to people who are homegrown. And they do that even as reports have come out. Just recently, the Southern Poverty Law Center released a report which indicated that white nationalists and white supremacists have killed dozens of people in just the last few years, quite a bit more, in fact, that have been attacked and even killed by white supremacist, white nationalist, militia types, patriot organizations than have been killed by Muslim terrorists in this country in those same years. And yet we don't use the term. We want to other terrorism. We don't want to look at it as something that is really a homegrown, central to America experience.
Tim, those are certainly some very interesting statistics there, but unfortunately we have to leave that right there. Tim Wise, an anti-racist essayist and educator, thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you.